The story begins exactly where the headlines have already exploded, with a comeback that was supposed to redefine a Hollywood era and a woman who believed she could rewrite the script of her own legacy. Viewers following the situation minute by minute say, "This is the moment no one wants to miss, a turning point wrapped in tension, promises, and whispers that have now turned into a global spectacle." And tonight, we go straight into the center of that unfolding drama. Meghan Markle, once hailed as the most anticipated returning figure in entertainment, stepped back into the industry with a confidence that insiders described as radiant, calculated, and ready for a coronation that had nothing to do with royalty. The project, a glossy docu-series titled I'm Meghan, was marketed as a triumphant rebirth. Executives murmured about a narrative masterstroke, a multi-million-dollar rescue rope for a star who had walked away from the palace and into the arms of Hollywood. For weeks before cameras rolled, the buzz sounded like the build-up to a cultural event rather than a simple show. The statements were bold, the promises were sweeping, and the expectations, some say, were impossibly high. Industry watchers, speaking off the record, insisted that this was not just another celebrity project, but a test case for reinvention, a chance for Meghan to emerge as a voice of resilience and self-curation. Every glossy magazine echoed the same sentiment. This was the comeback of the decade. She was going to show the world who she really is, one fashion editor recalled, and Hollywood was willing to believe it. Production insiders say the first days looked like victory. Meghan arrived at the Los Angeles compound in soft neutrals, her smile measured, her posture immaculate, her team orbiting her like a protective constellation. Cameras trailed her morning rituals, her planning sessions, her quiet reflections. The atmosphere felt curated but optimistic, the kind of energy studios love to bottle and turn into award season gold. A senior crew member remembers that moment vividly. Everyone thought, fine, she's perfectionist, but it's Meghan. Perfection is what she sells. But even here, only days in, small tremors could be felt. They appeared at first as subtle hesitations in the control room, quiet exchanges between producers, tiny adjustments that grew larger by the hour. Observers now say those early murmurs were the first warnings that the story would take a very different turn. For all the golden lighting and tailored sincerity, something behind the scenes began to strain, a sense that the comeback was already wrestling with the expectations it had created. An insider who witnessed the first week of filming explained it bluntly. "Everyone knew we were building a narrative about authenticity, but you can't build authenticity like a set piece. That pressure, from day one, was immense." Others recalled a strange duality. Meghan speaking softly about vulnerability on camera while exerting an iron grip on every detail off camera. "It was a tension you could feel in the air," another crew member said. Yet despite the simmering tension, the narrative presented to the public remained flawless. Beautiful stills circulated. PR teasers painted the project as an unfiltered portrait of self-discovery. Agents called it brave, analysts called it clever, and fans believed this was finally the version of Meghan she had wanted the world to understand. But the viewers who've watched enough Hollywood rises and falls already know, when a story begins this perfectly, the cracks are never far behind. And as we now know, the cracks were already forming, quiet, hairline, invisible to the public eye, but ready to split open in the most dramatic way possible, because the comeback everyone was waiting for was about to collide with a moment no one saw coming. And when it did, the spotlight would shift from triumph to crisis in the blink of an eye, and the world would not look away. The shift was subtle at first, the kind of change only people inside a production bubble can sense. But those who were in the room during week 2 say the atmosphere tightened like a rope being pulled from both ends. What had begun as a polished, optimistic launch started to develop a strain beneath the sheen. And according to multiple insiders, it all came down to one word Meghan reportedly repeated almost daily: precision. Crew members describe a routine that grew more demanding with each passing hour. Scenes that were scheduled for 15 minutes stretched into 90. Tiny movements were recalibrated. Lines of natural conversation were rephrased until they sounded more aligned with what Meghan called her vision arc. A lighting technician admitted that the team joked they should label each bulb with a timestamp because everything kept being reset. "It wasn't normal," he said. "We've worked with A-listers who are particular, but this was control on another level." One producer, speaking under strict anonymity, explained that the set gradually turned into what he called a silent maze. No one wanted to be the person who adjusted something wrong. You'd hear 2 words repeated over the walkies: "Hold position." And everyone did, literally and figuratively. Even small interactions, how Meghan picked up a coffee mug, how she paused before answering a reflective question, how she turned her head toward the window, were reviewed and re-reviewed. According to one insider, the turning point came during what should have been an effortless 5-second clip: Meghan entering a room, smiling gently, and taking a seat before speaking about personal growth. It was the kind of sequence that would normally take 3 minutes to capture. "We spent over 2 hours on that single entrance," the insider recalled. "Every step felt like choreography. She wanted it to feel real, ironically, but we couldn't make it real because she kept stopping to make it perfect." And this was where the tension deepened. While Meghan spoke on camera about embracing imperfection, what the crew witnessed off-camera was a relentless pursuit of flawlessness. A staffer described it as watching 2 Megans operating simultaneously, the reflective public figure and the meticulous director behind the scenes. "You could sense the pressure building," they said. She wasn't hostile. She wasn't shouting. It was the weight of expectation she put on herself and on us. It became suffocating. Studio executives monitoring dailies from afar began asking questions. Why were simple sequences taking entire afternoons? Why was a docu-series structured like a prestige film shoot? Why were budgets creeping upward before the real emotional content had even been captured? An internal memo circulated quietly among managerial staff, noting timeline irregularities and recommending a structural conversation with Meghan's team. But that conversation never happened, at least not then. Instead, Meghan doubled down. Individuals close to the production insist she believed she was shaping a narrative that demanded precision, that the world expected a level of authenticity that was paradoxically crafted with extreme care. "She genuinely thought this was the only way," said a producer who spent nearly every day on set with her. "She kept saying, 'If I'm going to be seen again, the truth has to be beautiful.' But truth isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's messy. And that was the disconnect." And, as one editor noted, "We weren't filming a documentary anymore. We were filming a quest." A quest, he added, that had no clear endpoint. Still, the public saw none of this. All they saw were carefully released stills, a few inspirational quotes, and glowing early whispers about the show's promise. But behind the scenes, crew members were privately comparing notes, quietly checking in with each other, trying to navigate a work environment that felt increasingly unpredictable. The breaking moment came during a closed-door review session, a meeting meant to assess early footage and determine the emotional tone of the upcoming episodes. Meghan reportedly watched playback after playback, her silence growing heavier with each loop. Then, according to a source who was in the room, she pointed to a sequence and said it needed to be redone entirely. The reason? She didn't like how her expression lingered too long between empathy and fatigue. The room fell silent. It wasn't the request itself that worried the staff. It was the realization that she could dismantle an entire day's work over a fraction of a second detail. "That's when I knew we were in trouble," the insider said. Not because she was difficult, but because she was chasing a version of herself that no one else could see. By the end of week 2, the tension had reached a level that even the most seasoned crew couldn't ignore. The smallest sounds, a clipboard closing, a boom mic shifting, A camera lens being adjusted seemed louder. People whispered. People waited. People moved slowly, as if afraid the air itself might crack. And according to those who lived through it, the crack was coming. Because while Meghan believed she was perfecting her narrative, something else was quietly forming just out of frame, something no one on that set could have predicted. It wouldn't be the cameras, the crew, or even the executives who shifted the course of the entire production. It would be a moment recorded by accident. And once that recording leaked, nothing about this comeback would ever be the same again. The moment that changed everything didn't arrive with a shout, a meltdown, or a dramatic walk-off. It arrived quietly. So quietly, in fact, that no one on set realized history had been captured until it was already spreading like wildfire beyond the studio walls. Insiders now describe it as the instant the comeback fractured, the second a carefully built narrative collided with something raw and uncontrollable. And according to those who reviewed the leaked material, the recording revealed far more than a single argument. It exposed the fault line beneath the entire project. The day began with a level of tension that crew members say they'd grown accustomed to. Meghan arrived early, surrounded by her personal team, dressed in the kind of immaculate neutral palette that had become her on-camera signature. On the schedule was a day-in-the-life sequence, family moments, creative meetings, and a reflective monologue about resilience after public judgment. It was supposed to be one of the emotional anchor points of the series, something that blended triumph and vulnerability into a narrative crescendo. But within hours, everything changed. Multiple sources confirmed that the disagreement started during the review of a particular sequence, one in which Meghan's eyes glistened with tears as she spoke about the pressures of public expectations. It was a quiet, delicate moment, the kind directors usually protect with reverence. According to a senior producer, it was one of the most authentic pieces of footage they had captured. You could feel the honesty in the room, he recalled. It was powerful. It was what we'd been waiting for. Yet Meghan saw something entirely different. The leaked transcript, now infamous, reveals the first spark. Meghan reportedly said the scene needed to be removed immediately. Her tone wasn't loud, but it was final. "I don't want people's pity," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut the silence. "I want their respect." The producer pushed back gently, arguing that the moment was real, unfiltered, and emotionally resonant, exactly what the series needed to ground its message. But the more he explained, the colder Meghan's voice became. "It's not real if I didn't choose it," she said. The sentence hung in the air like a verdict, unsettling, and revealing all at once. What happened in the next 30 seconds has been replayed endlessly by commentators. There was a long silence, thick, uncomfortable, suffocating. Then a sudden crash, something falling hard against the floor. Several insiders insist it was a chair. Others believe it was a script binder. The recording cuts off at that exact moment, leaving the rest to speculation. No one knows who recorded it. No one knows why. But within 48 hours, the file reached the inbox of a gossip outlet, tucked inside a plain, unmarked envelope. The only message attached: "You'll want to hear this." By dawn the next morning, it was everywhere. #Duchess Meltdown shot to the top of worldwide trends. Clips circulated before the studio even had time to react. Talk shows dissected the tone of her voice frame by frame. Some commentators called her demanding. Others called her calculating, and a few argued she was simply overwhelmed. But one thing became universal. People were talking, and the tone had shifted from admiration to doubt. Studio executives scrambled. Emergency calls were held before sunrise. Lawyers drafted statements that were never released. Internally, the leak was described as an uncontrolled narrative bomb, something that could not be undone. And while Hollywood spun its theories at lightning speed, Meghan disappeared from public view. Those who saw her in the immediate aftermath describe a woman shaken to her core. According to insiders, she broke down in a private meeting, tears streaming as she whispered, "I just wanted them to see who I really am." But outside that room, the world was no longer listening with sympathy. Every headline focused on control, perfectionism, image management. Every pundit analyzed the sentence. "It's not real if I didn't choose it." Even worse, memes erupted across social media, trivializing the emotional weight of the moment. Late-night shows mocked the audio. Influencers reenacted the quote, "The narrative, once hers, had been ripped away and reshaped by a global audience hungry for drama." Those inside the industry say that was the moment the comeback truly collapsed, not when the audio leaked, but when it became indistinguishable from entertainment. "When your authenticity becomes a punchline," one producer observed, "the damage is deeper than a PR crisis. It hits the brand, it hits the story, it hits the identity." And as the leak continued to dominate headlines, insiders watched in real time as doors that once swung open for Meghan began closing quietly, one after another. A private recording had made its way into the world, and its impact was only beginning. Because what happened next would show just how quickly Hollywood can turn on someone once considered untouchable, and how fragile a comeback becomes when the cameras capture what was never meant to be seen. Hollywood has never been gentle with scandal, but the speed at which the shift happened after the leak stunned even the most seasoned industry veterans. In the space of a few days, the story morphed from a promising comeback to a full-scale crisis. Insiders say the industry's response wasn't just swift, it was ruthless. And for Meghan, the fallout was more than reputational. It was structural, financial, and deeply personal. Executives inside the streaming platform were the first to panic. The leaked audio had gone viral at a rate they had not anticipated, transforming a controlled rollout into a public relations emergency. Conference rooms that normally hosted polished presentations were filled with tense, clipped voices, debating the future of the docu-series. One executive, quoted by a source who sat in on the call, summed up the mood with a single sentence: "We can't release anything until we understand how deep the damage goes." From there, the reaction cascaded. Brand partners began pulling back with quiet precision. A luxury label that had been preparing a soft launch collaboration, complete with mood boards, mock-ups, and preliminary campaign dates, froze the deal overnight. A representative from the brand, speaking discreetly, explained the decision this way: "We're not in crisis management, we're in brand elevation." This situation does the opposite. Another sponsor paused negotiations minutes before contracts were due to be finalized, leaving Meghan's team scrambling. Meanwhile, Hollywood agents who had once lined up to position Meghan for prestige projects suddenly started stepping away, as one insider put it. Calls that would have been answered in seconds were rerouted to assistants, then to voicemail, then to silence. One agent described the shift bluntly: "She went from being a potential asset to a potential risk. And in this town, risk is a currency most people avoid." But perhaps the most stinging reversal came from the media. Publications that once framed Meghan as a voice of empowerment began recalibrating their tone. Instead of glowing features, they ran analysis pieces. Instead of flattering photo spreads, they published commentary questioning whether her narrative had become overly engineered. One article, circulating widely, used the phrase, "the danger of over-curation," a line that insiders say Meghan's team read with visible frustration. While the headlines multiplied, Meghan herself went silent. For days, no paparazzi photos surfaced, no official statements were released, and no insiders were allowed to brief the press. Those who saw her during this period describe a woman visibly shaken, deeply anxious, and increasingly isolated. According to a trusted source, Meghan attended a closed-door meeting with senior advisors and broke down midway through. She reportedly held her head in her hands and said, "I tried so hard this time. I wanted to do it right. I wanted to show them my heart." Her team attempted to stabilize the situation, but every move seemed to unravel as quickly as it was made. Internal strategy documents, never meant for public eyes, outlined concerns about narrative contamination. Editors reviewing footage commented privately that they could no longer separate the scenes from the context of the leak. "You can hear the audio echoing in your head," one said. "It colors everything." Even allies within the industry began whispering doubts. A well-known talk show host, once among her defenders, admitted on background, "Maybe she pushed it too far. People aren't rejecting her. They're rejecting the sense that they're being managed." And that, insiders say, was the heart of the problem. The docu-series had promised authenticity, but the leak had painted the opposite picture. The more the industry replayed the audio, the more they questioned the idea of sincerity. Authenticity is the one commodity Hollywood treats as priceless. Once it's cracked, everything else begins to crumble. Back at the streaming headquarters, the pressure intensified. Observers of the internal deliberations claim the conversation shifted from "how do we save this?" to "do we release this at all?" Some executives pushed for re-edits, others suggested shelving the project entirely. Someone reportedly asked the question that hung heavy over the room: "If we release it, do we risk becoming part of the narrative instead of the platform presenting it?" That was when the quietly devastating phrase surfaced inside an internal memo: creative suspension. The public would not hear those words for now, but the meaning was clear to everyone involved. The docu-series was no longer a promising comeback, it was a potential liability. And just as the industry was distancing itself, Meghan's inner circle found itself shrinking. Advisors were burnt out, publicists were overwhelmed. Even longtime supporters seemed unsure how to navigate the storm without being pulled into it. The narrative was slipping, one insider said. Not inch by inch, but by the handful. Yet, amid the chaos, Meghan remained unseen. No cameras, no statements, no carefully staged smiles. Those who managed to speak with her reported a woman trying desperately to regain control, even as everything around her spiraled. She wasn't angry, a confidant said quietly. She was devastated and lost. Hollywood had turned, and it had turned fast. But the story wasn't finished. Because just as the walls seemed to close in, Meghan made a decision that would set the stage for the next battle, a decision her team believed might save everything, or end the comeback for good. The move came quietly, almost too quietly for the scale of the crisis surrounding her. While Hollywood chatter intensified and the public waited for a response, Meghan was already setting something in motion behind the scenes, a strategy her advisors described as bold, risky, and absolutely necessary. And according to sources close to the situation, it began with a single call to a firm that normally handles political downfalls, not celebrity crises. Insiders say the hiring of a top-tier political PR team was meant to reset the narrative, but the decision had an unintended effect the second it leaked. Commentators seized on it instantly. "You bring in a political crisis firm when you're not worried about one headline," a media analyst noted. "You bring them in when you're worried about the whole story collapsing." The public saw it the same way. The move signaled panic rather than control, and the optics only deepened the debate around authenticity. Even so, Meghan pushed forward. Advisors drafted plans for a sit-down conversation with a carefully selected journalist known for sympathetic interviews. The idea was to create a frame in which Meghan could revisit the moments surrounding the leak, explain the emotions behind the footage, and rebuild public trust. She wanted to show the human side, a source said. She believed that if people heard her speak calmly, heard her explain the context, they would understand. But before the plan even fully formed, whispers of the upcoming interview reached social media, and the reaction was immediate and divided. Supporters called it brave, critics called it calculated, and late-night hosts wasted no time turning it into fodder. One joked, "Either she's the most relatable woman on earth or the best actress Hollywood forgot to cast." Another quipped, "Nothing says authenticity like a political PR firm." Meanwhile, Meghan's team attempted to soften the landscape by orchestrating a series of controlled social media posts, mentoring young creatives, speaking about empowerment, meeting with non-profit leaders. These were moments rooted in her existing advocacy work, but the timing made them look scripted. A communications strategist inside the team admitted the challenge. Anything she does now looks deliberate, even if it's something she's done for years. Industry insiders watching from a distance saw the dilemma clearly. Hollywood rewards reinvention, but it punishes missteps born from overcorrection. She was trying to steer a ship that was already tilting, one producer explained. Every move had the right intention, but the wrong reception. Even within the studio, opinions diverged. Some executives privately supported a narrative reset, arguing that audiences are willing to forgive once they hear a heartfelt explanation. Others warned that doubling down on emotion would only reinforce the criticisms that she was curating rather than revealing. A senior editor put it plainly, "You can't package vulnerability. If people think you are, they won't buy it." Still, Meghan kept working. A source who met her during that period described her as exhausted but determined. She reportedly spent long nights reviewing transcripts, refining talking points, and trying to understand how everything had spiraled so quickly. She cried, the source admitted, not because she lost control, but because she felt misunderstood. She kept saying, "I wanted them to see the real me." Yet the harder she tried to regain control, the more the narrative seemed to slip from her hands. The conversation online hardened into two polarizing camps. One defending her humanity, one dissecting every gesture for signs of manipulation. Somewhere between those extremes, the truth, and the show itself, became overshadowed. By the end of the week, the situation reached a breaking point. Executives at the streaming platform held a closed-door meeting to discuss the future of the docu-series. According to someone familiar with the discussion, the mood was grim. "The question wasn't how to fix the show anymore," the insider said. "The question was whether the show could survive at all." And that is when the decision landed. Quiet, devastating, and final enough to stop an entire production in its tracks. The docu-series would be suspended, indefinitely. But the consequences of that choice were only beginning to surface. And what happened after would push the story into a new territory, one Meghan had never faced before. The suspension hit like a silent earthquake, no dramatic announcement, no press release, just a message delivered behind glass doors and passed down the chain with the weight of finality. To those inside the production, it felt like the floor had dropped away. Months of planning, millions of dollars, and an entire narrative machinery froze overnight. What had begun as a triumphant return now stood in limbo, not cancelled, but not alive either. A project trapped between ambition and aftermath. Insiders say Meghan received the news in a private briefing, surrounded by advisors who had run out of strategies. A person familiar with the meeting described the moment as emotionally shattering. She reportedly sat in silence, absorbing the words, then asked the only question that mattered: can it be fixed? The answer wasn't yes. It wasn't no. It was the kind of hesitation that tells you everything without saying anything. A long, uneasy pause. Outside that room, Hollywood was taking inventory. Agents whispered that the series had become too volatile, a product impossible to market without carrying the weight of the leak. Executives admitted privately that the suspension was more than a pause. It was a reset forced by circumstances they could no longer control. Once the narrative breaks, the product breaks, one insider noted. And once the product breaks, it's not about creativity anymore, it's about risk. But away from the boardrooms and strategy sessions, something shifted in Meghan herself. Those close to her say the days that followed were some of the hardest, but also the most clarifying. The panic eased, replaced by a quieter determination. Instead of trying to salvage footage or reshape headlines, she began reassessing the foundation beneath the entire comeback. The show had promised authenticity, But perhaps, as one advisor suggested, authenticity couldn't be orchestrated. A confidant recounted a moment when Meghan revisited the footage alone, without her team, without the pressure of perfection. She didn't watch the scenes the way she used to, the confidant explained. She watched them the way the audience might, emotion first, image second. She saw the cracks, but she also saw the sincerity. It affected her. Meanwhile, Hollywood's response remained divided. Some believed the leak marked the end of her second act. Others argued it could become the catalyst for a stronger, more grounded version of her brand. A veteran editor at a major entertainment outlet said, "People love the rise. They love the fall. But what they love most is the comeback after the fall. If she can rebuild from truth instead of control, she still has a chance." And that possibility is what began to reshape the conversation. The fear that once surrounded her name started to soften. A few journalists expressed cautious empathy. One director reportedly reached out privately, reminding her that even the biggest stars have endured public collapses. "Everyone gets humbled," he said. "It's how you stand afterward that matters." Within her inner circle, the tone shifted from defensive to reflective. The political PR firms stepped back. The urgency faded. A new approach, slower, simpler, less manufactured, took shape. Not a strategy, but a recognition. The crisis had exposed more than a broken narrative. It had revealed the pressure she had been carrying, the impossible standard she had tried to uphold, and the human vulnerability she had tried so hard to control. Hollywood will not decide her future overnight. The suspended docu-series may remain on a shelf or return transformed. But those observing closely say the story is no longer about a failed comeback. It's about recalibration, reinvention, a chance to rebuild not from a script, but from honesty. And for the first time since the leak, the question isn't whether Meghan can reclaim the spotlight. The question is what she chooses to do if she steps back into it. Thank you for staying with this unfolding story. If you want more deep dive breakdowns, royal drama analysis, and behind-the-scenes revelations, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is already forming, and you won't want to miss what comes next.